Hello everyone, welcome to the GrowCast Show. My name is Yu Hong and I'll be your host for today. And today in our studio, we have Rabecca Lai, top 4% producer, our 14,000 agents in PropNex. So let's get to our questions. What made you leave a senior stable corporate role to enter into real estate?
Okay, so it was actually a mid-career switch, which I've made deliberately because I wanted work that spoke to me more and something closer to home with like direct impact and a sense of fulfillment. So in my corporate years, I've actually helped large organizations make money and I was good at it, but the impact felt very abstract and very far away. But property is actually the opposite. When I help a family sell well and they move into a home that genuinely improves their life, I can see the difference I've made in their faces, in their security. So in the life that they get to build next. So knowing that I've made a direct positive difference to someone else's life is really what gets me up in the morning now. And that wasn't a leap away from corporate discipline. It was actually carrying that discipline into my current work. And that part of it feels very meaningful to me.
You came from a corporate career, not sales. Yeah. So what did those years teach you that helps your client today?
Okay, so my corporate experience spans across leasing with shopping mall landlords and also regional business development for brands and with the government as well. And where I was involved in policy making and enterprise development to strengthen Singaporean businesses and also help cultivate like a very conducive business environment. So property at the end of the day comes down to three things. Analysis, negotiation, and reading people under pressure. So I did all three for 13 years, closing complex, high-value deals with sophisticated counterparts. That experience transfers directly to getting my clients the right home at the right price. So unlike traditional agents who focus on like matching clients to homes that they like, I bring a data-driven and deal structuring mindset to every transaction. I treat the purchase of my client the same way I would handle a deal for a corporate client because that's simply how I work.
You've only been a property agent for 2 years.
Yeah.
Why should someone trust you with one of the biggest financial decisions of their life?
Okay, this is a very fair question because I would rather that, it's been asked out loud than you keep it in your mind. So I've sold property for 2 years, but at the same time, I've also analysed and transacted real estate for over a decade before that. I got a real estate degree from NUS with honours and then years on the commercial side, structuring and closing property deals and also advising businesses on where to put their money. So that's why I work with evidence, not instinct. And most buyers are sold a story about a property, but I build you a case, benchmarking the unit against comparable transactions, weighing it against the supply pipeline, and pressure testing the numbers before you ever fall for a property, then giving you a plain call like should you buy, wait, or walk away, and exactly why. So new to the title, yes, but new to property judgment, no.
How do clients know you won't just push them to buy so you can collect your commission?
Because I'm not interested in a hit and run transaction. I'm building a relationship I expect to keep with my clients and their family for the next 20 years. And that changes every incentive that I have. I would not advise clients to do something which I would not do for myself. And case in point, I actually advise my client to take the first offer which had come in because everything considered, it made sense, right? But that was something that I did for my own transaction as well. Case in point, when I sold my own 5-room Hougang HDB at the end of 2024, I actually told my husband to accept the very first offer on our flat. It was a record price with over 48k cash over valuation. Okay, I'll be honest, I couldn't have known for certain whether holding out would actually have fetched more. Nobody can, but the comparable transactions, the buyer's profile, and the numbers all said that it made sense to move on, even on the first offer. So we did, and that price still holds record there today. So my job is to protect your interests, not to chase a slightly bigger number at the cost of a sure outcome, and never to pad my own transaction count. So if like the mathematics say move, I'll show you why. And if it says don't, I'll also tell you that. So I perceive my role to be an objective, non-emotional kind of consultant. But at the end of the day, I will still actually defer to my clients on the ultimate decision.
So you often share the idea of sold one, bought two.
Yeah.
Did you actually do what you advise your clients to do?
Okay, yes, I actually did it for my own family, and that's why I can talk about this with conviction rather than theory. What I did was I sold my 5-room flat in Hougang, and after that, my husband and I, we bought 2 properties, one as own stay property and one as an investment property. So the own stay property was actually a 4-bedder because my family, there are 3 adults and 1 kid, so we needed ample space in order to house a family. And for River Green, which is the investment property that I bought, is basically a 2-bed, 2-bath. So this was what I did with my own money, my family's money, and also my family's security on the line. But that said, I think everybody's circumstances is very different. So what I do is actually do a very tailored approach to look at my clients' circumstances, finances, and goals to establish the right path forward in terms of their property planning without overstretching my clients financially. Yeah. So I won't ask my clients to do anything I have not done myself. And also, I won't tell them to do anything which would not work for them.
Why did you choose to buy a 4-room condo for your own stay instead of something flashier within your budget?
My methodology at that point in time was that I had a set budget that I was working with for my own stay property. And that's why that limited us to certain areas, if especially I wanted a 4-bedder. Yeah, so instead of looking at a sexier address or a project in a more prime areas, which means a smaller condominium or smaller unit, I actually look at certain areas, and I eventually landed on Pasir Ris because at that point in time, there was a subsale project nearby called Pasir Ris 8 that was being transacted, and I thought that it had a potential to actually pull up the project that I eventually landed on, which in my opinion is the second best in the micro market. Yeah, so this logic worked well for me because around 8 months down the road, my own unit has already grown by around 130k in valuation. So ultimately with this decision, it got my family the space that we needed, but at the same time, we didn't have to forgo like the investment part of it. So it was to me a good balance, of like the investment and also fulfillment of own stay requirements. To me back then, the trade-off between the nicest unit versus like the smartest unit actually makes sense. And very rarely they are the same unit.
Has your own property journey taught you anything the hard way? A decision that you actually do differently today?
Okay, so the answer is yes. And it is actually a pain that I carry into my work today when I manage my client's portfolio, and that's why I'm willing to share it very openly with you. So what happened back then was when we were deciding on our first property, there was a choice between a 5-room flat in Hougang, HDB, or an EC, which is actually 100 Palms at that point in time. Yeah, so if we had gone ahead with 100 Palm back then, we would have been, maybe 7 years down the road, we would have been sitting on a profit of around 600k to $1 million. But at that point in time, I think the thinking was that, okay, we wanted a unit immediately, and also at the same time, we wanted space. So we went with the 5-room HDB at Hougang. Yeah, of course, in terms of profitability, it's definitely nothing compared to what we would have gotten if we had gone into 100 Palms. Yeah, so I thought that was something that I look back on and I kind of regret, because at that point in time, we didn't have any kids. Our arrangement was very flexible. It was just my husband and I. And we were actually in the prime position to be going into like an EC investment. The painful lesson learned was that for us, we actually only sold our flat around 2 years after the initial 5-year MOP. So even though we had like full financial capacity to have upgraded earlier, but we had always assumed that we were not in the position to upgrade. But actually, what happened was we did not even sit down to do the financial calculation to ascertain whether, it was safe for us to move on to the next property. And actually, this is what I see in most clients as well, because, and I fully understand, because there is a lot of fear, and when you are living in comfort, there is actually nothing that would like push you to take that next step. Yeah. So my job now, and what I see my job to be, is that I don't want my clients to suffer or rather miss out on the same opportunity that I did before.
What is your philosophy on property and money in a nutshell?
I feel that property should be serving your life and not the other way around. I don't believe in stretching a family to the edge just for them to own a property or for a status address. That's not how I work with my clients. And also at the same time, I also don't believe in being frozen out of fear. So what I do is, I do very deliberate planning for my clients. And for my observations, like the wealthy people whom I observed in my corporate years, right, they were not reckless, they were not paralyzed, they were actually very deliberate. So they bought good assets, they held their nerve, and they planned the structure, and they let eventually what their plan is, do the heavy lifting. So my job is to bring that same calm, evidence-based discipline to my client's decision so that 10 years from now, they will look back and think that is the best decision ever instead of something that has stressed them out.
For someone going from HDB to private for the first time, how do they know that they can genuinely afford it and not just on paper?
So in fact, this is the very first question the very first conversation that I have with my clients each time. So before we even look at the product, before we even look at a single listing, right? Because affordability to me is not the maximum that the bank can lend you. It is what you can sustain without losing sleep at night. Yeah. So what I do is I map up your full financial situation, CPF, cash, monthly cash flow after the mortgage, and also buffer for interest rate movements as well, looking at your timeline, etc., so that we can do like stress tests on the eventual plan. So I'd rather show you that, like for instance, a $1.8 million house will keep your family secure than stretch you to the maximum at like $2.2 million and watch you feel trapped. Okay, so upgrading is supposed to give a better life, not a heavier one. And if the numbers say wait 6 months, I would also tell you to wait.
Honestly, should everyone upgrade from HDB to private, or is that just what agents say?
To me, at least, the answer is no. And I'll say it to my client's face, even if it's not to my best interest. Yeah, because private isn't automatically better. So for some families, a well-located HDB could make more sense than, stretching to get into a private property. Maybe because, for instance, they require a bigger space. Like they have a big family and they need a big space. So upgrading to me needs to fulfill one of two things, meaningfully improve how you live or meaningfully grow your wealth, ideally both, right? If it does neither, then it's just a pricier version of staying put. And I would rather lose a sale than put a family into a house which burdens them.
Should an upgrader sell their current home first and buy after, or they buy first, then they sell later?
Okay, so there's no universal answer to this, and it very much depends on the finances and also the risk appetite and also the market window of the client. But it's actually one of the most consequential calls that anybody can make in terms of like real estate transaction, because the wrong sequence can actually cost tens of thousands of dollars in extra stamp duty or force a rush sale. So I'll actually walk both paths with the client with actual numbers to understand a bit of my client's risk appetite. What I'll do is I'll walk my clients through both paths with actual numbers, let them understand on the ABSD exposure, if they were to buy first, the bridging risk, and also in terms of like sale proceeds, etc. So a big part of getting this right is actually estimating how long the current property will realistically take to sell, and then negotiating the completion timelines on both the selling and the buying so that they can dovetail perfectly, and hence giving my clients like a seamless back-to-back move without paying for two homes at the same time or scrambling for an interim housing.
With interest rates, cooling measures, and ABSD, is now even a sensible time to actually upgrade?
Be very wary of anyone who answers that with a confident yes, buy now, or no, wait. Because the honest answer really is that it depends on your specific situation and not the headlines. So most of the time, timing the market is nearly impossible, but timing your own life and finances is very possible. So rates and cooling measures change the mathematics, but they rarely change the real question, which is, does this move actually improve your family's position over the next 5 to 10 years? So what I'll do is I'll show my clients today's conditions specifically and how today's conditions specifically affect their numbers before we decide per your situation whether to proceed or not. Yeah. So it's really not about like the fear of missing out or the fear of buying at the top, because the market will always give you a reason to hesitate. But my job is to help you make a decision that you can defend 10 years from now.
I keep hearing that 2026 is a window for HDB upgraders. So is that real or just agent talk?
Well, in my opinion, it is real, and I have data to back it up, because around 13,500 HDB flats actually hit their 5-year MOP in 2026. So with these data points in mind, right, I know that yes, the recent 2026 Q1 data for HDB resale index actually slipped for the first time since 2019 by around 0.1%. So some HDB owners actually actually think that now may not be the right time, right, looking at this indicator. But if you were to look at a broader picture in terms of the upcoming supply, it actually makes a lot of sense for HDB owners, to be taking that step to sell their flat right now before some of these supply come on stream into the market.
If supply is rising, will my own flat be harder to sell? So should I just wait?
More MOP supply means that the average flat in an average location will sit on the market longer and can't be priced, on the 2023 price fantasies anymore. But the supply isn't evenly spread. So that's one thing that we should actually note. And it's heavily concentrated in a handful of towns. Some towns like Punggol, Queenstown, Tampines, and Toa Payoh, they actually carry the biggest cluster this year. So if your flat is in one of those locations, you are now competing with many fresh units coming out into the market. And hence, for homeowners whose houses are in this area, they need to price realistically in order to move with intent. So if it's a well-located, high floor or larger HDB flat, actually it would still be able to find its buyer. The trap really is waiting because the MOP pipeline, it doesn't shrink after this year. It grows to roughly 15,000 flats in 2027, 19,500 flats in 2028. So waiting and see often means, selling into softer conditions, not stronger ones. And my job is to tell you honestly which side of that line your specific flat sits on, not to give you a blanket like sell now or hold.
What is the number one biggest mistakes that you see upgraders make?
I would say that I see commonly two mistakes which upgraders make. So firstly is buying with too much emotions. So some of the upgraders, or rather some of the buyers, they would walk into like a property and see that, wow, it is very nicely furnished, the interior design very nice, and they put a lot of value to this. But actually at the end of the day, you realize that for like a resale flat, upon sale, it doesn't come with the furniture. Yeah. And for like a show flat, likewise, for a new launch show flat, likewise, it doesn't come with the furniture. But all this furniture and the interior design, what it does is it plays on the emotional factor of like the buyer coming in. Yeah. So my job is to look at numbers to objectively advise the buyers on the investment value of the property. The second biggest mistake that I do see very commonly is ignoring the exit plan. So buyers, when they buy a property, they should always be mindful of like who the property can exit to eventually. There should be a plan and there should be discipline in analyzing some of these key figures. And also that's why when I work with my clients, I bring the discipline of having evaluated, hundreds of properties to ask some of the boring things that matter a lot. And that's how I help my clients plan accordingly. Okay, it's not that the emotional part is not important, but what I'm saying is that the numbers need to get a vote as well.
When you recommend a project, how do you decide whether it can hold or grow its value?
When I recommend a project, what I do firstly is I go on a very data-driven approach. I don't base it on my own emotions. I base it on data, hard facts. So what I do is I would basically do a very in-depth analysis into the recent comparables. I will actually do a very in-depth analysis into the recent comparable transactions for nearby properties and also for the properties itself. I will also consider things like, for example, some of the competitor listings and also assess like the price gap between the property that my client is looking at versus the rest of the market. Of course, there are other things to consider, for example, like transformation plans in the region and also pipeline launches in the region to establish the potential of future growth. So take, for example, my own property, which I bought for own stay in Pasir Ris. I actually considered that there was a subsale project nearby in the same micro market, which had started to transact. And with that, I saw that it had a potential to bump up my own property prices. And I took that decision based on this holistic understanding of the entire area's future growth potential. Yeah. So this is something which I do think that a lot of clients, they might not be able to see, or rather a lot of people who are not in the industry, they might not have the experience to assess based on these hygiene factors before choosing their homes.
New launch or resale condo, which is more suitable for an upgrader?
Usually, how I would advise my clients is to first understand what kind of lifestyle they are having and what do they hope to achieve out of their next property. Like if I were to compare these two different assets, right, intrinsically, they are, yes, both private properties. They are, in my opinion, two asset classes which behave intrinsically very differently. So in the case of a new launch, it has certain characteristic. For example, it allows for progressive payment, and hence there are some costs which you don't have to pay for a new launch versus a resale property. But a lot of people, they don't see that because for resale properties, sometimes it comes with a lot of hidden costs which don't exist in a new launch. And these costs, when added up together, they actually impact the return of investment on like a property. So for example, the interest costs involved, because for a resale property, you'll get hit with like the full mortgage at one go. Yeah, whereas a new launch is progressive pay and the interest is on whatever has been disbursed out to the developer. Yeah. Another cost that is in a resale property that's not in a new launch is like, for example, renovation costs that you have to spruce up the unit for, and also maintenance charges. Yeah, that is payable as long as you collect the key, whereas a new launch is only payable upon TOP. Then also property tax, which comes in straight away for a resale property. To me, there's actually no right, no wrong between buying a new launch or a resale property. It really depends on the client's situation. So say, for example, if the client requires an immediate own stay home, then definitely a new launch might not be so suitable because there's a build-up period, whereas a resale property could be more suited because it's already immediately there. Yeah, but if the client is okay to, for example, move back to their parents' home, yeah, and wants to go stronger to unlock investment value out of their property, then a new launch might be suitable for them.
How do you make sure your client is not the one buying at the peak?
Okay, so firstly, I have to admit that it is almost impossible to time the market because the market can fluctuate, according to many different factors. But what I do for my client is for every property transaction, or rather every project, I would do a very in-depth analysis to make sure that the price that they buy into makes a lot of sense versus the prognosis of what is to come in terms of the market price movement versus the current comparable transactions. And of course, actually, negotiation plays a big part in property transaction, right? So I am confident in terms of like how I can negotiate for my clients. And it has shown in the past transactions that I have done that I have consistently put my clients in a good position, whether they are buyer or seller. If they are buyer, I've managed to help them secure more favorable prices as compared to other transactions within the same project. And for sellers, I've also managed to help them secure like record prices, yeah, for sale of properties. So I think like for property purchase, it's not so much of like comparing yourself to other people. Like for instance, if like right now you need to purchase a property for your own need, right? You need it now and this timing is right for you. So what I do is to safeguard my clients' entry prices into the market. Yeah, because if my client can secure a price that is more favorable than all the other transactions in the market, they are already in a winning position and I've successfully helped them obtain a safety margin.
Can someone upgrade their own home and still hold an investment property? Or is that only for the people who are wealthy?
Well, all I can say is that it's more achievable than what people assume, which is also why I structured my own property portfolio in this way, right? A lot of people think that, no, they definitely cannot afford to buy two properties without actually running the numbers. Yeah. So the type of properties that you buy into, like for example, if you have a own stay and one investment, if you, for example, just to put things into perspective, if you were to buy a resale property, you can always rent it out and get rental in return, which can cover the mortgage. The crux, I think, is really to look at the whole real estate portfolio holding in totality to ensure that firstly, the down payment is sustainable, right? You've got cash liquidity on hand to be putting in for the down payment, right? The second part of it is to ensure the long-term sustainability in terms of the combined mortgage payment, right? And also any related costs vis-a-vis any income that you can potentially get, for example, rental income for the investment property. So as long as this assessment is done properly, right, and is at a level which is sustainable for your lifestyle, or rather for my client's family lifestyle, then it's actually a safe approach to go ahead with.
What does working with you actually look like from the first meeting to handover and after the purchase? Do you still stay involved?
Firstly, I can guarantee that it's going to be a fun journey. So for me, when I work with my client, it always starts with a conversation, right? I'm not the kind of agent who would product push, because I think that is very important to understand my clients well. Like what are their aspirations, what are their current lifestyle needs, and where do they see themselves in the next couple of years before even coming up with a holistic plan that can sit into their overall portfolio holdings. Yeah. So when I work with my client, like I mentioned, it's not on a short-term basis. I always look at long-term growth together with my client. And hence, when I produce a property roadmap for them, it's usually on a long-term basis of like 10 to 20 years. Yeah, instead of just looking at the immediate next transaction. So after the purchase, many of my clients, they are actually friends to me already. So I will treat them like I would with any of my friends. Basically just chit-chat randomly, go out for meals, coffee, just keep in touch like friends.
That's all the questions we have. Stay tuned for the next episode.